And we would like to welcome you to the first ever African American Experience podcast of the African American Experience class here right in Piscataway. The name of the podcast is The Experience. Short, sweet, simple, and right to the point. And for today and for our first ever podcast, we have with us our special guest, Ms. Chane Jones, lawyer for the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, who will be having an in-depth and compelling discussion about the criminal justice system as well as economic empowerment and mobility within the African American community. The interviewers for today are my students of the African American Experience class, Miss Laila Jackson, Miss Mehkia Matthews, and Mr. Edward Sylvestre within the class, and they will be leading all of the questions and conversations for today. We hope you enjoy it, and welcome. Sure.
All right, so yeah, today we had the conversation about how you deal with social justice and things like that, and I know dealing with politicians can be a hard thing, and I wanted to know what are some ways you can pressure the politicians to get things done other than sit-ins and stuff like that?
So I would say from what I've learned at my time at the Institute, sit-ins, in a sense, are actually the way to go, not necessarily sit-ins specifically, but numbers. Politicians really pay attention to numbers. So what we found is that you can talk to a politician one-on-one frequently and nothing might not happen at all. But when you start to present them with their own constituents and in large numbers, they actually pay attention to that, because the reality of the situation is those people represent votes for them and them being able to maintain their seats. So the best example, which was mentioned, and you all saw the video earlier during the class, the 94% rally that we had. Prior to that rally taking place, the Institute had been in discussion with Governor Murphy multiple times in regards to the demands that we were making, and there was no action being taken at all. But it wasn't until they realized the very real movement that was about to occur. And at the time, we had 1,000 people who had RSVP to attend the event. The nor'easter storm occurred that weekend, and we still had a little over 500 turnout. Wow. And so knowing the night before that people were on social media talking about how they were coming to this rally, that really pushed Governor Murphy to a place where he realized, okay, I got to this position by way of the vote from those 94%. And for the listeners, the 94% was derived from a meeting that the governor had with some of the prominent black leaders in the state of New Jersey, in which he mentioned that he received 94% of the black vote, and essentially insinuated that if he had not received that significant amount of the vote, he likely would not have been the governor. And so because he received such a significant amount of the black vote, he felt compelled to address the issues of the black community. But 9 months into his administration, we had not seen any change on the issues that we put forward. So as I stated, when he saw that people were talking on social media saying, I'm coming to the 94% rally, mysteriously or coincidentally, or rather I should say not so coincidentally, the night before the rally, he signed an executive order putting into force a youth task force, which we had been asking for those 9 months that he had already been in administration.
Okay. So like when you get these people to come to these rallies and stuff like that, I can imagine that's hard. So how do you get people off their phones? How do you get people to engage in things that actually matter to them?
So we start with their phones.
Yeah, okay.
We start with social media. It's very important to use social media, especially in today's society. We have what's become the term social advocacy. So people enjoy the use of hashtags. If you go and you look at the hashtag, the 94%, you will see a lot of people reposting images on there. So being very clever with the use of social media to engage young people, and then engaging with other organizations. So while we were the organization that kind of called for and organized the 94% rally, we worked with the NAACP, we worked with Salvation for Social Justice, the Association for Black Women Lawyers, the League of Women Voters for New Jersey. So there were a number of organizations we worked with in coordinating that movement. And so I think that you have to be very strategic in taking a multifaceted approach that appeals to a number of generations. But yes, social media actually was the way in which we did that. Ryan Haygood, the CEO and president of the Institute, if you go on Twitter, you'll see he tweets a lot. So he's very active. And so he was just constantly tweeting about the 94% rally. And then we also went old school, using the phone, the night before the rally, we every person that RSVP'd and said, we're just calling to remind you that we have the rally tomorrow, and we wanted to see if you would still be showing up. So it's a mixture of bringing kind of those old school techniques and some of the more modern day techniques into play to get people from across multiple generations.
Okay, so you know, when we talking in the class, we were talking about how we have these policies and things that get approved, and you know how you said mysteriously overnight he happened to change what he had changed. I wanted to know, how easy is it to get these things changed?
So it depends on what you're asking for. So something like a task force, which is the convening of a committee, that's something that is delegated within the governor's power to be able to sign an executive order to do. So in that sense, it's just something as simple as a signature. But there are other things that actually require laws to be put in place, or I should say, or constitutional amendments. And that requires going through the legislative body. And so that's a little bit more tedious because, number one, you have to develop and draft the bill, and then you have to be able to get it on the legislator's calendar for a hearing. And it has to go through a Senate committee, it has to go through an Assembly committee, and then once it goes through both of those committees, it has to go to an actual floor vote before both the Senate and the Assembly, and you have to get the necessary votes. I mean, the Assembly alone, we have 80 seats that are available in the Assembly. So that, you know, there's a lot of votes that have to be gained in order to get legislation passed, and that's when we're just speaking about legislation. If we start talking about things that require constitutional amendments, those actually then have to be placed on the ballot for voters to vote on. So it really depends on what you're looking for.
One of the questions I had, you said numbers are really important, and oftentimes when we talk about mass incarceration, the numbers that we highlight are the effects of Black men that it has. Like, how do you think that the issue and the epidemic of mass incarceration affects Black women? Like, is it a separate issue, or is it kind of like a conjoined issue that should be solved as one?
So it is a conjoined issue that should be solved as one. In the report, so my colleague, Andrea McChristian, she is the director of the Criminal Justice and Youth Justice Reform Pillar at the Institute. She actually authored a report called Ain't I a Child, and it focuses on the school to prison pipeline. And in that report, she discusses the fact that over the past few years, there's actually been an increase in the amount of young women who are incarcerated, and it's been rapidly increasing. And then there's also the research that she discussed that shows that young Black girls are suspended at significantly higher rates than other children, including than young Black men. So it is a concern, and it's an issue that is important, and it's one that we address. So in our push for youth justice reform, we seek the closure of all youth facilities, both the young men's facilities and the young women's facility. And I think that in society as a whole, there's been in recent years a push to kind of that's kind of pretty much saying we matter, Black women matter. So you see when Black Lives Matter came out, you know, there was a lot of focus on individuals like Eric Gardner and Tamir Rice and Walter Scott, and then Sandra Bland happened, and we knew that Black women were being killed and treated with police brutality as well. But when Sandra Bland took place, there was the emergence of hashtag Say Her Name, and that you know, now people say hashtag Say Her Name or say his name to give a face and an actual personality to the person and to humanize the individual that has been killed. But when it emerged, it was essentially a statement saying that this affects Black women too, and we need to talk about it. If we're going to really adjust the system, we have to do it in a holistic manner that addresses both Black men and Black women, because it's affecting us all. So, yeah.
So we were talking about in class, we were talking about the definition of like prison and what it really is supposed to be. And you said, you asked, is it punishment or is it rehabilitation? So you said it was rehabilitation, but I'm trying to see like, what do you mean by like that? And what do you think that like should be in these places where these people should go?
So I just want to give a small correction. What I said in the classroom is that what we push for is what it should be, which is rehabilitation. As it exists now, it is for punishment. When you really look at the history of the penal system in the United States, it was developed to criminalize and incarcerate Black people. It was a form of modern day slavery. When you look at the 13th Amendment, it still leaves out that clause, so to say, or that carve out, right, where, you know, slavery is not allowed but for, you know, a criminal conviction, essentially. So, you know, the penal system was developed as a form of modern day slavery, and what we advocate for is the reform of that system on every level, from the laws to the way that they are enforced, to what prison facilities look like. We likely will probably need to come up with another term for them, but we advocate for those systems actually being rehabilitated. And that's one of the things we push for with the youth justice reform, and the task force is looking into now is how can we take facilities that exist now, like abandoned facilities, and turn them into more group home styles, so that children who do need to be taken out of the home have somewhere that is still home-like to rehabilitate. And again, we want the removal of children from the home as the last option. So other programs as well that can assist children where they're still able to stay with their family and be in communities that they're familiar with. So yeah.
Okay. Also, earlier we were talking about how they had, I forgot what school it was that was, I think it was in Newark, you said, and how they had turned it essentially into a detention center for juniors. I wanted to know, do you think this is something intentional that's going on around America? I personally feel it's intentional, but, you know, we see this in other cases where we see things that are supposed to help us are really hurting us. And, you know, also even in class, we were talking with Mr. Viney about how even Martin Luther King boulevards or Aves are usually the most violent in the area. So I wanted to know, like, you know, is there anything else that, you know, because that was interesting that you brought that up about how the school was turned into a detention center. And I wanted to know if there's any other examples you have of that, you know.
So the school that you're mentioning is a Bordentown School. It's located in South Jersey, and when it was created, it was a school for African American young people. It was a co-ed school, residential school for African American young people to go and receive an education, and they were offered multiple paths of you know, careers. So anything from being a lawyer to being a tradesman, all types of courses were offered, and it was closed in 1955. And now the building remains, but it is a youth detention facility. So it is a literal depiction of the school to prison pipeline. And so I don't know of any other places that were formerly schools that have been turned into prisons, but as I noted in the class earlier today, a lot of school facilities in urban areas have the same depiction as a prison facility. So you see lots of straight hallways and doors, just, you know, series of doors that mimic the same style as cells would. It's just instead of bars, you have an actual physical door there. So I think it's kind of and this is not a new theory, but it's pretty much getting young people in urban areas, which are usually predominantly Black and brown, used to an environment where they are
like prisoners,
incarcerated.
Yeah. You know, I definitely believe what you're saying. I've seen it myself. I've lived in urban areas my whole life. This is one of the first times I've actually been in a suburb. And you know, when you go to these schools, for people that don't know over the air, you know, you have cages over these windows. You know, these hallways, you know, they're highly policed. They have people that come in. You know, they tell the kids what to do. You know, of course, you need that in the school, but when you have, you know, higher numbers every year of police officers that come in, and you have students who are being sent to different places and different facilities, yeah, I definitely believe what you're trying to say, where, you know, we're turning schools into trying to subconsciously make people of color not think it's right, but just make it comfortable for us, so that when eventually later on in life, if, you know, unfortunately you go to jail, you feel safe, you feel kind of at home, more comfortable with the idea of being there. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like a lot of people around America don't really notice that, and I'm happy you brought that up during the assembly. So, yeah.
No, definitely. You know, one of the other things about urban schools as well is that all of them, or at least all the ones I've entered, have, you know, metal detectors.
Definitely.
So just from the moment you approach the school, the design of the school, what takes place in the school is oftentimes very much so like a prison facility. And that is definitely intentional. I think just the criminalization of Black and brown bodies from what, you know, a black male should be like, or what a Black woman should be like, what a Latino male should be like, and what a Latina woman should be like. Much of that is situated so that they are always falling short and always seen as a criminal. You know, there are studies that show that young black boys are viewed as black men. That was something that came out and was discussed a lot in the Tamir Rice incident. Yes. That a 12-year-old boy was perceived as a grown man. And so it starts at a very, very young age, from the school facilities to just the overall perception of young people that are, you know, Black and brown. They essentially are not allowed to be viewed as children in our society. Yeah.
Okay, so I do like that the word intention and intentionality keeps coming up, because I do agree with the fact that everything that as Black and brown people we go through really truly is intentional. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand that. And another thing that a lot of people don't understand is the school to prison pipeline and how real it is. So could you just give, for the people that don't know, like a quick rundown of what that is?
So the school to prison pipeline, so it starts at a very young age, actually. So what they found when the term school to prison pipeline came out and the research came out with it, what they essentially found was that the standardized test scores of like second graders and third graders, even as low as kindergartners sometimes, was used to determine the amount of jail or prison facility space that was needed. So where children would score very low, they would then prepare and set aside the funds to create prison facilities so that those same amount of children would eventually be in the prison system. So again, a direct school to prison pipeline. But then also the way in which the facilities of schools are set up in urban areas are that mimic prison facilities. So as you know, Edward stated, the people are not as shocked when they enter into a prison facility because it's what they're used to seeing in school. And then the other thing is how rules are enforced in school and suspension rates that Black and brown children are suspended at higher rates than white children for things that really, when you think about it, that's what children do. Children make mistakes, you know, but for some reason, when it comes to Black and brown children, those mistakes are not viewed as just mistakes. They're viewed as that child is bad, and therefore that child needs to be criminalized. And so it's really been something that's been going on for years that, again, started with the standardized test system, but now has transpired into the creation or the structure or design of school facilities. And what we see now is just literally in a separate youth justice system. That in and of itself is very mind-boggling that we have a criminal justice system for people who create crimes, but now we have a youth system for young people that create crimes, that we view children as having the potential to be criminals. as opposed to individuals who may or may not need, mental health resources and other resources.
Also, I'd like to add in, just to give you guys an example of some of the things. I know I've gave previous examples, but, it really is, they're really trying to ingrain this into people of color. You can even just look at the schools, you know what I'm saying? When you look at modern schools in the suburbs, you don't see cages around the basketball courts. You don't see, metal detectors when you walk into the school. And this is intentionally done. We can't hide this. This is intentionally done. There's been people of high order who have said this is intentionally done. So yeah, just go to your public schools and look how they're designed. They're really made to make you feel like this is okay.
So you talked about how black kids, like from the beginning, are criminalized, and so I was thinking about like you being a lawyer and being a black woman. How is it like? How are those stereotypes come into play when like you do your field of work, and how hard is it to like break out of that box? So if I just want to make sure I'm clear on, you're asking me, what are some of the restraints or stereotypes that surround me as a black woman in the legal field? Yeah. And this is a deep conversation. Now, within my work environment, I'm fortunate to, be surrounded by other black attorneys and just, attorneys who don't have a negative mindset. Obviously the work we're doing is for black and brown communities. But when it comes to the legal field, I have definitely had my share and my fill of how black women are perceived. And I think when you're talking about some of the things, the challenges we come up against, I think it's twofold, and I'll explain this in detail. But I think one, there's the impact of being a black person and then being a woman together, and then two, there's the impact of being a black woman. So I'll explain where the difference is with that. So I find that being black in this society, we're often perceived as being of less value and of less quality. We have less to offer. And being in a patriarchal society, that is also true about women. So when I explain it, I often do it as numbers. If every, human being is given like your number is 5 for quality. Well, for black people, they have to take off 5. And if you're a woman, you have to take off 3. So I'm black, I got to take off 5. So that puts me at 0. And then I'm a woman, I got to take off 3. That puts me at -3, so it's, but in reality, we know black women are actually like at a 10, #Black Girl Magic, Exactly.
But society looks at us as, okay, well, you are automatically of lesser value because you're a black and because you're a woman. And this is true when we're talking about equal pay. So my other colleague, Demelza Bear, she actually did a report called Becoming the United States of Opportunity. She's the director of our economic mobility pillar. And in that report, she talks about the pay gap. And what was found is that for every $1 that a white man makes, a woman receives about 67 cents. A black woman receives approximately 50 cents. Wow. And a woman of Latina background receives approximately 45 cents on that $1. So when we're having conversations about equal pay, black women are often overlooked in that conversation, and Latina women are overlooked in that conversation because we're just looking at 67 compared to $1. But really, black women are making even less than white women. And so I think that's one of the things that, it's a setback for us in being in the legal field or being in any field really in the world, is that automatically, for some reason, we are looked at from society of having less to offer. And so that kind of cuts off opportunities before we even get a chance to show like, hey, we have something to offer here. Now, my personal viewpoint nowadays is, okay, well, it's your loss. You don't deserve my benefits. But we know that when it comes to that actually in play, it's very detrimental to us because we don't have the opportunity to fairly compete. So then the second part is just being a black woman. I think we see that the best example of that is Michelle Obama. One of the most qualified, like the most educated, I think she is the most educated first lady to have existed. She had 2 Ivy League degrees. And what you see as being a black woman, we come up against 2 stereotypes. If we are confident, we are viewed as arrogant. And if we are assertive, we are viewed as angry.
Loud.
And that is a stereotype that continues to persist. And so what I found for myself, even just in law school, when I would point out issues within my school and I would say, you know, there's a problem with race here, or we need more faculty members of color, I had those individuals who would look at me like, oh, she's
Yeah,
black.
she's nagging.
She's, right,
She's bringing problems.
she's
Yeah,
nagging. Right, exactly. And then, you know, there were those who were, oh, well, you're from an urban area and you probably got here from affirmative action anyway, so you should just be grateful that you're here. And so in that sense, it's, you know, it's a challenge, it's a barrier being an African American woman in the legal field and in any field really, because you have to fight to make your voice heard, and still stay true to yourself. Because the reality of the situation is, if I'm advocating, I don't want to do it with a smile and a please at the end. You know, I shouldn't have to, and no one else is expected to. But for Black women, you're somehow told that you have to do everything with a smile and be graceful about it, because if not, you're going to be angry. And so really just being willing to push against that and remind myself that no, I'm not angry, I'm assertive, and no, I'm not arrogant, I'm confident, I know my worth, and reminding myself of that and surrounding myself with other Black women who have that same mindset is very, very important. Because the reality of the situation is, in today's society, people who have not moved past the angry Black woman stereotype are people who don't want to. They want to perceive you as angry. So right. So their perspective is not going to change. So being able to maintain the fight and the courage to push against that anyway is important.
And so at this time, we are actually about to close up. So Laila, Mehkia, and Edward, I'd like to thank you for an amazing interview. Ms. Jones, phenomenal.
Oh, thank you so much.
You know, once again, we would like to thank you for coming and being our guest teacher, and then coming to be our first person for the first ever podcast. First ever podcast for the African American Experience course here. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed our first ever podcast. This will be available very soon, coming to BuzzFeed or SoundCloud, depending on what the students want to do near you. Once again, my name is Mr. Elmani Viney. This is the African American Experience, aka the Experience Podcast series, and program number 1. We'd like to thank you for joining us, and we have more coming soon within the series. And thank you, and also have to do this shout out and thank you to Piscataway High School Radio and Television Club. Shout out to my former student that's sitting over here and guiding us through. And Tom Wollerton and Miss Pasculo and who's the other? And Mr. G. Mr. G. Okay, we'll edit part of this. But once again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and we will see you soon. Peace.